Okay, welcome everyone to assignment 2. This is going to be positive negative space and then also rule of thirds. And it's all about composition. How do you put an image together? So that's kind of hard. Some people just start drawing in one spot and they end up where they end up, right? So this is going to help you place things on the paper in a more interesting way, and it's just another drawing tool, and you can use this in painting, cinematography, and photography. If you're a photographer, you probably have heard of the rule of thirds. So it kind of lends to a lot of different crafts. What I have in front of you is a drawing of a little porcelain can that I have, but I'm using it as an example to show you the difference between a dynamic composition, an interesting composition, and a kind of like static composition. And what I mean by static is something that does not take your eye around the image and activate your senses. So one of the first things you want to realize is that anything placed in the center, most of the time it can be very boring for the human mind to look at. So as you saw, we've been drawing for 60,000 years, probably even more, and so our brain is really developed to these senses over thousands of years, and so it's advanced. And when something is kind of simple like this, it approximates everything and it categorizes this side from this side, and it sizes things up, your mind, and then it moves on, So that's all about that edge detection, and our brain just automatically does that when we look around the world and when we see things with our eyes. We size it up, we detect the edges, and all of this happens within a split second. But it's something that we naturally do. Okay, so if you want to grab someone's attention, then you're going to have to use some of these tools, right? You're going to have to use the rule of thirds or the idea of positive and negative space. All right. So in this case, we have this positive space, which is the actual object. So positive, and the negative space is the background behind the object. Okay, the table, for example, is acting as some positive space. So in this case, they may look very balanced, but like I said, they're the same on each side. So our brain automatically says, okay, this side is pretty much similar to this side in size and shape, and it moves on quickly. If we come down here, the negative space and positive space are equal, but then we have this weird interruption here on the side, and then no interruption here on this side. Now I know what you're saying, like it's obvious, okay, I just need to offset things and it'll work. Sometimes that's not the case. It depends on what you're drawing. This has a lot of wrinkles, has a lot of shading, or it can, and it really holds its space in the drawing itself, and it might not work for something that's a little bit more simple. So it all depends on what you're drawing and making the decision to make it either to the right, to the left, to the top, or bottom. Okay, one thing that you do want to keep in mind is that the positive space can be black or white. So whatever the positive image is, it doesn't matter what color it is, as long as the background is the opposite color. So this can be white, and then this would be black, and this would be black as well, and you would get the same balance. So the color doesn't matter. What matters is the balance between the space around the background and the actual objects that you're drawing. All right, so negative space is the space around your object, and positive space is the actual object and table, if you can see it. All right, so we're going to look at rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds goes something like this. So we're going to do rule of thirds. And this is your picture, your paper size, paper, and you want to figure out where to place some objects, okay? So what you got to do is draw yourself the rule of thirds grid, and you're going to split this into thirds vertically and horizontally. So what that looks like is you're going to draw a very light line and a very light line. So these should be equal, but I'm not going to measure, but it helps if you kind of like try to get them equal. And you want to draw them really light because in the final drawing you don't want to see these. You want to erase them, right? Alright, so there's my vertical thirds, and now I'm going to draw my horizontal thirds. Alright, so here's our system. And these lines are just guides to help you place objects, okay? So to make an interesting image, I'm going to have to use this grid as a guideline. And the grid says these lines act as hotspots or interesting areas to place things. So if I place things along these lines, then it's more exciting for the eye. All right. And the reason is because we like to differentiate between things, right? And these areas really activate the senses to where they keep the brain guessing and they keep it on its toes. So if I wanted to add something like the Coke can, I would add it along this line here, okay? Also, these open areas are called dead spots. Dead spots, meaning they are areas that are not interesting. If you place something in this area, like the center, it hits all of these dead spots. Now granted, it does hit these two hot lines here that move across, but overall it's in this dead spot, and it could be very boring to look at, especially if it's a potato like I drew here. Okay, so if you look at these areas here, these are called hot spots. That's where the target areas are. And what a hotspot is that if you place something in that area, it's very, very exciting for the eye, okay? And like I said, this isn't a concrete rule, it's just a guide, and it works most of the time, but not all the time. All right, so I'm going to do a little drawing of three objects in front of me just to utilize this rule of thirds. And I'm going to draw my Coke can again. And I have a little paintbrush over here I'm going to add, and I'm placing these along these lines. See, this brush lands along the line here, which is going to help me balance my positive negative space and chop up the space into something more interesting. All right, so I can add like maybe Another jar that I see in front of me here. And that's perfectly aligned with this hot spot, or this hot line. Alright, so I really didn't have to guess on where to place my Coke can. I just said, okay, there's my line, so I'm just going to put my can right on top of it. Same thing for my bottle and my brush. Okay, so pretty much I have a very nice composition. My table can like cut across here, and I have a good balance between this, you know, negative space and positive space, and I can play with that table if it's not really balanced as I want. All right, so then this would get blacked out. Take more time on this. I'm going kind of fast, so it's not a super long video. But I'm creating my negative space just to show you, like, it's pretty interesting. Now I got a big can, and my mind says, oh, that's bigger than this small bottle. And these two things are standing upright while this thing is laying down. So I have a lot here from our mind to kind of figure out, which makes it a good drawing or a good composition. All right, so what we're gonna do next is go over the assignment. You're gonna have to choose 3 items to draw, and the first thing you want to do is make sure that you gesture draw it a few times. So whatever's in front of you, don't choose a phone, that's not allowed. Don't choose your headphones. Don't choose anything that's too simple. You want to choose like maybe a crumbled up Coke can, maybe like a weird looking jar or a bottle, a fork, a spoon. You can use a shoe. Make it interesting, but don't use a phone, don't use your headphones, and don't use anything that's too simple. Okay, so that's the first requirement. And once you get your 3 objects in front of you, you want to arrange them in an interesting way. Okay, you want to play with them and say, okay, that looks pretty cool, and they look kind of fun to draw. So I'm going to draw these 3 items, and I'm just going to practice with them until I feel comfortable with them, right? I know their curves. I know different shapes that happen for each one, and you want to get familiar with it, right? So figure out like a good grouping, and then once you do one, you can change it a different way. Maybe that's that, maybe that's laying down, but use the same 3 objects and just practice with them for a little bit. All right, once you're done practicing on your newsprint, you want to move on to your good paper, and then you want to take a ruler and start laying out your 12 squares. Okay, so there's going to be 12 squares, and each of them are going to be 2 inches by 2 inches. So what I like to do is put my ruler down, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Draw a line, and then you do the same thing down the side. Two, 4, 6, 8, 10. Draw a line, stop at 10. Okay. 2, 4, 6, oops, 8, 10. Draw a line, and then you do the same thing down here. Now obviously I'm making more than 12 squares, but we want to make squares that have where you're allowed to kind of mess up, and so that's okay. This is all practice anyways. This isn't like a final drawing. Okay, so once you're done with that, you should have your marks here and here, and you connect them. So you might have to rewatch this part a few times to get it down, but basically you're making 2-inch boxes. Okay, so now I got some composition boxes, and I'm going to use the rule of thirds so I can draw my little third lines in there very light. And that's going to tell me where I can place items. So I can bring my objects back over here and display them how I want. And say, okay, well, this can goes here on this line. And on this one, I want you to go ahead and try some shading. Not required, but for those of you that are advanced, go ahead and make this little mini composition shaded if you want to. But not required. Okay, so this little object here is hitting on this line. And then my brush is back here. Then I have a separation here. And I'm going to totally black out this back area. This is where you want to take your time and be clean with each composition. I'm going fast, don't copy me. And you really want to black this out. So if you have a 4B or a 6B, that's going to be a soft lead, and it's really going to let you black this out easily. You don't want to use anything with an H letter. That's going to make something very light. So use a 4B or a 6B, even a 2B. Right now I have a 4B. And spend a lot of time just blacking it completely out to where there's no grain and nothing, no paper visible. Because we want that stark separation between white and black here for the positive and negative space. Alright, and now you can kind of see, like, that's pretty balanced. This area is balanced with this area. There's some shadow in this little triangle that I had here. And it looks like a pretty cool composition. For my next one, I do the same thing. Very lightly draw my lines. Oh, and don't forget to erase those grid lines. I don't want to see those either. So make sure you erase those, and now you're completely done. So these lines have to be very light. Okay, now you want to switch up your composition for this next square. And this is a hot spot here, but so is this down here. So I'm going to make this lower, and I'm going to start my cup along that area, my can. And you can do some shading if you want, like I said, just to give you more practice. We will go over shading pretty soon, but not yet. So these are smaller drawings, but it's going to make you focus a little bit more on what's happening in your objects. So you're going to make decisions on what you need to, or what you want to include in the drawing, and what's important to you. That's totally up to you. So I know on the assignment it says not to do shading, but it's okay. You can make lines inside these positive shapes. It's just good practice. Completely black this out. All right, so you're done with number 3. Just erase your lines like so. All right, so another thing you can do is you can zoom in. What if you just wanted like a close-up of something like this can? Draw your rule of thirds and say, man, I really want to zoom in on these two things. And so I can like start my drawing way up here. And so this area right in here becomes really zoomed in. Right? My table here. And I can't even see my clip. That's okay. So now I have a zoomed in version of what I'm looking at, but it still makes an interesting composition. And you would black that out as needed. So now it's almost abstract, like you can't see all the details, but that's okay. And I want you to do a couple like that that are blacked out and really kind of abstract. All right. If you mess up, just use a different square, but make sure you have 12 good ones and number the ones that you want me to look at, 1 through 12. So if this one's not good, don't number it, just skip it and go to 3, and make sure you number 1 through 12. Okay. If you have any questions, email me, and good luck.